I built something that looked like permanence. A private medical practice with my name on the door, a house in a quiet neighborhood outside Charlotte, and a marriage I believed in completely. My wife and I had been together for 11 years, married for 8. We had a 12-year-old son named Caleb who loved baseball and hated broccoli. And we had another child on the way. 7 months along, a girl we were planning to name Lily. I was 44 years old, and I thought I had already survived the hardest parts of life. I was wrong. It started on a Thursday evening in October. I had a late patient, a follow-up that ran longer than expected, so I didn't leave the office until nearly 9. I texted my wife before I left, no response. That wasn't unusual. She sometimes fell asleep early because the pregnancy exhausted her. At least, that's what she told me. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was lit up, which surprised me. All the downstairs lights were on. My wife's car was in the garage. I walked inside and found Caleb at the kitchen table doing homework, still in his school clothes, at 9:15 at night. I asked him where his mother was. He said she'd gone out earlier and asked him to watch himself for a few hours. He said it like it was nothing, like it had happened before. I kept my voice calm. I fixed him a snack, helped him finish his math, got him into bed. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and waited. My wife came home at 11:40. She was wearing a dress I hadn't seen before. Dark blue, fitted at the waist, and her hair was down in a way she only wore it when she made an effort. She smelled like someone else's cologne and something sweeter underneath it. Something I recognized after a second. Alcohol. She was 7 months pregnant, and she smelled like alcohol. She startled when she saw me sitting there, pressed one hand to her chest and laughed a little, nervous. "You scared me," she said. "I didn't know you were home." I looked at her for a long moment. "Where were you?" She said she'd gone to her friend Rachel's house. A small get-together, just a few people, nothing big. She said it like it was the most natural thing in the world. She said she'd only had one sip of wine because someone handed it to her before she could say anything. I told her that Caleb had been alone for 3 hours. She said she knew, that she'd checked on him, that he was fine. I told her that our 12-year-old son had been doing homework alone at 9 o'clock at night while she was out at a party in a dress I'd never seen. She said I was overreacting. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have the energy for it. I just told her we'd talk in the morning, and I went upstairs. I lay in the dark for a long time listening to the sounds of her moving around the kitchen below me, and I had a feeling in my chest that I recognized from medical school. The feeling you get right before a diagnosis you didn't want to make becomes the only diagnosis that makes sense. The next morning, I called Rachel before my wife woke up. Rachel picked up on the second ring and immediately started talking about what a wonderful evening it had been and how great it was to have everyone together. I let her talk. Then I asked how many people had been there. There was a pause. She said about 15 or 20. I asked whose house it was. Another pause. She said it was at a place in Dilworth. A friend of a friend. She was clearly uncomfortable now, and not sure how much I knew. I thanked her and hung up. When my wife came downstairs, I was already dressed and standing in the kitchen with my coffee. She was in her robe, moving carefully the way pregnant women do in the morning, and she gave me a small smile like the night before was already behind us. I put my phone on the counter and asked her one question. I asked her who Derek was. The smile didn't leave her face immediately. It sort of stayed there, frozen, while something changed behind her eyes. A recalibration. She was deciding how much I knew. I had seen Derek's name that morning when I looked through her phone while she was still asleep. I don't make apologies for that. I had a pregnant wife who came home smelling like cologne and alcohol after leaving our son alone for 3 hours, and I needed to know what I was dealing with. There were 43 text messages between my wife and a contact saved only as D, and when I scrolled back to find where those messages started, I found they went back 7 months. The entire length of her pregnancy. The messages weren't explicit. They were something worse than explicit. They were intimate in the way that belongs exclusively to people who have crossed a line together and are trying to maintain the pretense that they haven't. "You looked beautiful tonight." I keep thinking about the conversation we had in the parking lot. I know this is complicated. I just can't seem to stay away. She stood at the kitchen counter and told me Derek was just a colleague. Someone she'd met through a mutual friend. Someone she talked to occasionally. I asked her why a colleague she talked to occasionally. I asked her why a colleague she talked to occasionally had sent her 43 messages over 7 months. She said it wasn't what it looked like. I asked her what it looked like. She said things had been hard, that she felt disconnected, that she wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I'm a physician. I've spent 20 years learning to listen to what people say and to what they don't say. What my wife wasn't saying was that nothing had happened. She was explaining feelings, offering context, building a framework of justification. She was not telling me that Derek was just a friend, because he wasn't. I told her I needed her to be honest with me. I told her that whatever had happened, I needed to hear it from her directly. I told her I was giving her one chance to tell me the truth and that I would know if she wasn't. She cried. She said it had been an emotional connection, that they had gotten close while she was struggling with the pregnancy and feeling unsupported. She said nothing physical had happened. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, "Then you won't have any problem with the paternity test." The silence that followed that sentence was one of the most clarifying moments in my life. It lasted about 4 seconds. 4 seconds during which my wife, who had just told me nothing physical had happened, looked at me with an expression that was not relief and not confusion, and not the mild offense of a faithful person being unjustly accused. It was fear. She said that was insulting. She said she'd already told me nothing happened. She said she wasn't going to submit herself to a test because I was being paranoid and punitive. I told her it wasn't optional. She said she wasn't doing it. I said, "Then I'll have my attorney explain why it is." I left for work. On my lunch break, I called a family law attorney. My colleague had used 2 years prior. I had a consultation that same afternoon. By the end of the week, I had retained her, and we had begun drawing up separation documents. What I want to tell you is that the paternity question was the thing that broke me. But honestly, the paternity question was almost secondary. I'm a doctor. I understand that anxiety about a paternity test, in the context of a claimed emotional-only affair, means exactly one thing. My wife knew it meant exactly one thing. The fact that she still refused told me everything I needed to know. But I also want to tell you about the conversation I had with Derek. My attorney advised me not to. She said it was unnecessary, potentially inflammatory, and wouldn't help my case. She was right on all 3 counts. I did it anyway. I found him through LinkedIn. He was a commercial real estate agent, 40 years old, recently divorced himself. I called his office number on a Tuesday morning, and he picked up immediately, pleasant and professional, and I introduced myself by name and told him I was my wife's husband. The pleasantness evaporated. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I'm not built that way. I told him that I was aware of his relationship with my wife, that I was in the process of legally separating, and that I wanted to ask him one direct question. Had anything physical happened between them? He said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "I'm sorry. That's between me and..." I told him he didn't need to finish, that the silence was an answer. I thanked him for his time and hung up. 4 seconds for my wife. And now this. I don't remember driving back to the office. I sat in my car in the parking garage for about 20 minutes, just breathing. 20 years of marriage. No, 11 years total, 8 married. I kept doing the math like the numbers might eventually add up to something different. They didn't. The paternity test happened 6 weeks later, after my attorney made clear through correspondence that I was fully prepared to pursue it through the court if necessary. My wife agreed, finally, through her own attorney. The test was completed at a certified lab, non-invasive prenatal paternity testing. It's more common than most people realize. A blood draw from the mother, a cheek swab from the alleged father. Results in about a week. I won't tell you that I wasn't afraid. I was a grown man with a medical degree and 20 years of professional composure, and I was terrified of a piece of paper. Because I wanted Lily to be mine. Despite everything, I wanted her. The results came back on a Wednesday afternoon. I was in my office between patients. My attorney emailed me the document, and I sat at my desk for a full minute before I opened it. Probability of paternity, 99.997%. Lily was mine. I put the paper down and looked at the framed photo on my desk. Caleb at 8 years old, gap-toothed and grinning at a Hornets game. I thought about what it means to be a father, what it requires, what it costs. Then I picked up my phone and called my attorney and told her to proceed with the filing. My wife called me that evening. She said she had the results too. She said she hoped this proved what she'd been telling me all along, that she'd never intended for anything to go this far, that she was sorry, that she wanted to come home. I told her I was glad Lily was mine. I told her I would be a present father to both of my children. I told her I wished her no harm. And I told her that I was still filing. She cried. She asked how I could do this when the baby hadn't even been born yet, when our family was right there. I told her that the family she was describing had stopped existing 7 months ago, that I hadn't made that choice, that I wasn't going to pretend otherwise for the sake of convenience. She asked if there was anything she could say. I thought about it. I genuinely thought about it. And then I said, there was. In the kitchen that morning, you had one chance to be honest and you chose not to take it. That's not something I can come back from. The divorce was finalized 8 months later. Willie was born healthy, 6 pounds 11 ounces, with a full head of dark hair. I was in the delivery room. Whatever had happened between her mother and me, that had nothing to do with her. I held my daughter an hour after she entered the world, and I made her a private promise that I've kept every day since. We have a shared custody arrangement now. Caleb splits his time between our homes, and he's adjusted better than I feared. Though some nights he calls me from his mother's house for no particular reason, and we just talk about baseball for 20 minutes, and I understand what that means even if he doesn't have the words for it yet. I'm 45 now. I'm back to working 4 days a week. I took up running last spring, which I hadn't done since my 30s, and there's a trail along the creek near my house that I run most mornings before the rest of the world wakes up. It's quiet there. I've started to recognize the regulars. The older man with the golden retriever. The woman who always has headphones in and nods without breaking stride. I don't tell this story for sympathy. I tell it because I spent the better part of a year asking myself whether I'd overreacted, whether the emotional affair without confirmed physical contact was enough to end an 8-year marriage, whether I owed my children a reconciliation I didn't believe in. And every time I asked myself that question, I came back to the same place. 4 seconds of silence when I said paternity test, the fear in her eyes, instead of the relief that belongs to an innocent person. The 43 messages she never mentioned. The dress she put on for someone else while our son sat alone doing homework. Some things you can work through. Some things you can work through. Some things you can rebuild. But you can't rebuild on a foundation where you already know what's underneath it. I sleep well. My daughter is healthy. My son still calls me to talk about nothing. The morning trail smells like pine and creek water and the particular cold that comes in October in North Carolina. I thought I had already survived the hardest parts of life. Maybe I was right after all. I just had the order wrong.